Hello, my name is Melanie Nerona. I'm a Senior Manager of Policy and Insight at Economist Impact, and I'll be your moderator for today's Insight Hour on plastics and circularity, closing the plastics loop. And this is supported by Plastics Europe. Now, the discussion today is a part of the series for the World Ocean Summit events. The World Ocean Summit Asia Pacific is currently ongoing, and I do encourage everyone to tune into those sessions. The next event in our series will be the World Ocean Summit 2022, and that will be held in Lisbon between March 1st and 3rd next year. But coming back to our discussion today, there are many pathways to enabling plastic security. So from recycling to reuse. And a new wave of technologies, specifically chemical recycling technologies, is really promising to transform recycling practices. In fact, Economist Impact just launched an assessment of these advanced technologies, comparing them with more mechanical based approaches. And it's interesting because these technologies could potentially accelerate efforts to reach ambitious recycling targets, as the one from the Circular Plastic Alliance that required 10 million tons of recycled plastic to be used in products by 2025. Now, of course, in addition to this, as we explore in our research, an effective regulatory framework needs to be in place to enable a circular economy for plastics. There are some exciting developments on this front, but also innovation in business models, in partnerships between stakeholders that were previously unheard of. So, oil companies coming together with cosmetic brands, for instance. Now, all of these elements of a circular economy for plastics will be the focus of today's discussion. And to join me in this discussion, we have four esteemed panelists representing various stakeholders along the plastics value chain. So please join me in welcoming Benny Mermans, Vice President Plastics Europe and Vice President Sustainability at Chevron Phillips Chemical. We have Felix Bezzati, Global Circular Packaging Director at Mars. We have Florica Fink Huya, Director General Environment at European Commission. And we have Vanya Veras, Secretary General at the Municipal Waste Europe. A warm welcome to our panelists. And so let's get started. So I'd like to structure this discussion into two main parts. So the first, looking at solutions for plastic circularity and the regulatory framework. And the second, looking at collaborating for solutions. So to kick off this first bit, where we focus on defining these circularity pathways and the regulatory framework, Benny, I want to come to you first. So maybe speaking on behalf of other plastic producers, how do you perceive circularity? Why is it so important to your industry?
Thanks, Melanie. And first of all, thanks for inviting us here at the World Ocean Summit. Let me first state that as an industry, we are committed to producing our life-enriching products sustainably. We want to really leave behind the lightest footprint and thereby enabling others to do so as well. But we also know that producing them can come at a cost. And without recycling and proper disposal, plastic waste ends up in our landfills and our waterways. The severity of the climate crisis requires us to do this in our collective best interest, to take action so we can mitigate the impact of climate change. This is why our commitment is to constantly focus on ensuring plastics continue to deliver the societal benefits without having a negative impact on the environment. And that is also why we, as an industry, support the European Green Deal and the Paris Agreement's ambition to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Therefore, I think it's clear to state that a circular economy is vital to us in realizing these ambitions for mainly two reasons. Firstly, we believe that discarded waste has no place in the environment. From a resource efficiency and a waste perspective, it allows us to keep materials normally within the loop for as long as possible. Plastics are a too valuable resource to be wasted, and we really have to break the mindset in being it seen as a thrown away commodity. Secondly, we also believe that it is going to be the main vehicle to which we can significantly reduce our carbon footprint. Another point I really want to make is the inherent assumption that circularity equals recycling. Recycling is just a component, but there is much more than that. We are really talking about a top to bottom system change, from the energy we use, how we design and manufacture products, to the ways in which plastics are transported and have the potential for reuse, be collected and recycled, both mechanically and chemically. We know that we are making progress, but we are still only at the foothills of the circular economy. And to accelerate this transition, we really must harness the power of the European single market as an enabler to ensure competitiveness and a harmonized regulatory framework. We need policy and regulation which promotes and incentivizes investment in innovation and infrastructure along the value chain. It's also about enabling the sustainability of our supply chains and creating opportunities for businesses, large and small, to develop the high tech and sustainable innovations upon which the competitiveness of the European economy is dependent. I think I can state that we are the catalyst for the industry with the responsibility to deliver solutions which are safe, sustainable, and circular. And I think that really spells for us the importance of the circular economy.
Thank you, Benny. I think it's interesting to see the recognition in the plastics industry of this issue and of the role of their role in this issue. So I want to turn to another corporation in the value chain, in the plastics value chain, the users of plastic packaging. And so, Felix, I'd like to come to you. Could you tell me a little bit more about what Mars is doing in terms of plastic management?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation, and very happy to be in this panel. In our case, I'll just give you maybe an explanation on what we do and we have absolutely control in our hands, and what we'll have loved to see as a change also from a systemic perspective. As a brand owner, that we use a lot of packaging, there are two main criteria that they will bring the circularity of our packaging. The first one is all about the design. So how we design a packaging by giving it the maximum of chances to either be reused or recycled outside there. So this is all about the design, and be the combination of the different materials, colors, for example. So this is something that we can control, and it is in our hands. So we decide what type of packaging we put in the market. This is the design piece. However, the challenge that we have, it's more on the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is about the shared responsibility. And what I'm talking about infrastructure here is about the collection, sorting, and the recycling of our packaging as such. Having our packaging being collected, it will really depend at the municipality level. The same for the sorting. Uh, from a country to another, we see different types of collection and sorting. We lack this harmonization today. So these are things that we'll have liked to change. And then is the recycling as such. It's like how we go from the collection and sorting to the recycling. And here you mentioned also new technologies such the chemical recycling, which will open the door to more and more recycling of our products.
Thank you, Felix. You've mentioned quite a few things that I will want to come back to over the course of this discussion. But first, I'd like to turn to Florica. Now, Florica, clearly we're seeing some examples of corporate action here, and to make that possible, the regulatory framework needs to be in place to enable that. Could you give us and the audience here an overview of, some of the initiatives and the regulation that the European Commission has put in place, and which do you think has been the most effective?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on the panel. And also, I should also encourage or congratulate the colleagues from the industry, because they take it serious. And indeed, regulators like us and industry work now hand in hand. And that is actually already the first buzzword for me, because what we as regulators try to do is putting the right framework conditions up, but for the entire industry, whether users or producers, but also ensure a level playing field. And now you ask me, what have you done already, or what is having teeth and what is concrete? We had, might remember that the Circular Economy Action Plan, where plastic in particular was identified as having a lot of potential for circularity. But obviously, we also, as being from DG Environment, we want to ensure that we don't release plastics into the environment. But we also want to ensure that we have the circularity approach. Therefore, we need a critical mass of material to ensure high quality recycling, but also then a secondary high quality material. Now, we had the single-use plastic directive, and I think that has become super popular, and everybody knows that these single-use items have been banned. And I think you see already in your daily life a really change. And I would like to use the plastic bottles, which is something we all knew were one of the main issues that landed up as litter in the oceans. And because of this SOP, the Single-Use Plastic Directive, we have imposed recycled content on producers. We have asked producers to make sure in the eco design, for instance, the caps are attached now so that they cannot be littered separately, and that is one of the main issues in the oceans. But also we set separate collection targets, and actually quite high ones, so 25% by 25, and then 30% by 2030. Now, actually, some in the industry already go beyond, so that is really a proposal that is taking root, and I think has been very much embraced by the consumers. And I'm quite sure in 6 years, when we review it, we will hopefully see less litter. Another one that we already have since 2013 actually is a waste framework directive. And that has put in place so-called waste prevention programs, so as to limit the waste generation, but it also obliges to make measures to encourage reuse of packaging. It has also provisions on the polluter pays principle, so that the polluter, who really is the original waste producer, has to step in. And again, very high quality recycling and separate collection targets. All of this quite important. Now, let me turn perhaps to where we will go from here, because we don't stop. We have the Sustainable Product Initiative that will come next year, which is, and we have also the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive review. Now, all about is about prevention. So idea in plastic is to reduce, prevent, reduce. Is there not an alternative? So don't use it, or reduce, then no over packaging, for instance. But also, if we have to have it, then go for recycling. And all of this starts by the design phase. And I think Felix already mentioned that it is really starting to design a product, a plastic product, so that it can be reused, can be extended, can be recycled, and so on and so on. And that goes, by the way, not only for the product, it also goes for the packaging, and it goes for material, plastic material as such. So I think that's quite important. And we will also be, as I said, review the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. And we are also launching at global level some initiatives, especially to go towards, hopefully have a mandate at the new NER 5 on a global plastic treaty, because obviously it's a global issue, it's a global responsibility.
Thank you, Florica. I think you've highlighted some really interesting initiatives, starting with the Single-Use Plastic Directive and the focus on eco-design and separate collection of plastic targets as well. I do want to come into some of those elements, particularly the waste prevention program, again, a little further in the discussion. But just to, again, make sure we're hearing from all of our panelists right at the start. Vanya, I want to come to you. What is your role, or what is the role of municipalities in fostering plastic circularity?
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for this panel session. Municipal Waste Europe is a European organisation based in Brussels, which represents about 75% of the European population and their municipal waste management. And our members are municipalities and their public waste management companies. In the greater part of Europe, local authorities or municipalities are responsible for the separate collection of municipal waste, collection full stop, But we don't do that in isolation. There's the Waste Framework Directive. We work very closely with the European Commission. We work very closely at Brussels level and also national level with industry as well. And there are several enablers and blockers at local level. First of all, waste is a local problem. Second of all, waste will always find the cheapest route. So we must find ways to facilitate correct action. And we must take into account that the fact, unfortunately, that the north and west of Europe happen to have much better governance than the east and the south of Europe. Lack of good governance means lack of separate collection, means lack of sorting, and means waste ending up in the wrong place, most often illegally landfilled, either in Europe or outside of Europe. So the waste framework, the waste shipment regulation revision is very welcome. Plastic circularity for us means coordination with extended producer responsibility organizations, which means the industry. It means design for recycling. Today, we are dealing with plastics waste, which is not all recyclable. Chemical recycling is something which we acknowledge the industry is making great efforts with. But when they mention chemical recycling, this must be recycling of the material and not include any energy recovery within the process at all. Transparency is very, very important there. Otherwise, we will not get to closed loop recycling. Now, the governance issue is problematic. So is the existence of unregistered brokers and dealers. We make effort both in time and finance, an organization to separately collect quality and quantity of plastics so that economies of scale can be achieved, both in sorting and in recycling. But when somewhere along that path, after those that sorted plastic waste has left the hands of the municipalities, it is bought by unregistered brokers and dealers, that is the point where illegal shipments happen. And this is happening inside Europe and outside Europe with European waste. I have to mention one thing here. We have negative proof from the example of Sweden introducing the incineration industry into the EU ETS. This pushed the prices for incineration up dramatically within 6 months and led to illegal dumping by a Swedish company in Sweden. Now, that's shocking. We hear about it elsewhere, but Sweden manages waste well and is very well known for that. So we have to be careful that we are not pushing waste to the cheapest route and highest earnings for those who wish to act illegally when we increase measures.
Thank you, Vanya. You've raised a lot of really important points. And I think the statement that stood out to me the most was that waste finds the cheapest route. And in thinking about that, I'm very curious to just have a bit more of a discussion on chemical recycling, because it often isn't the most cheapest route. And Benny, I want to turn to you for just to touch on this a little bit. The research that Economist Impact just put together, of course, still recognizes that mechanical recycling will still be the first port of call because it's simpler, it's cheaper. But advanced technologies, particularly chemical recycling, are redefining the materials that can be considered recyclable. So is there a path, Benny, to 100% recyclable plastics?
That's an interesting question, and I think the first thing we have to acknowledge that we are still at the very beginning also of chemical recycling. So the technology is still being developed. We are still having technical issues that we need to address, and particularly also economy of scale, but also purification techniques. But one thing I think we can clearly state, and that's really following the waste hierarchy, is that chemical recycling is complementing mechanical recycling. Today, there are plastics that cannot be recycled, whether we talked about mixed plastics or hard to recycle materials. But even more important, chemical recycling brings the material back to its monomer and gives the same characteristics as virgin plastics in that regard as well. And I think that's an important element because that enables us to also address applications that are going to be in food contact or applications that are requiring pharmaceutical requirements in that regard as well. Is chemical recycling the silver bullet? Absolutely not. It's not going to lead to 100% recycling. We are going to be having to approach everything from a very, very multi-pronged approach. Everything is going to be needed, whether it's substitution, reduction, reuse, mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, following the waste hierarchy. And if we do this collaboratively, we might get to a point where most of the plastic pieces as waste are going to be recycled, reused, or recovered.
Thank you, Benny. Just a follow up on that. So, are we talking mainly about packaging, though? Would these solutions apply to a broader range of plastic use cases?
No, absolutely. I think we are very cognizant, of course, that plastic is being used across many applications. We are talking about material into automotive applications. We're talking household goods, construction waste, insulation materials, appliances, and automotive. There are today many examples through collaboration as well on technical and innovative solutions that make it recyclable. So we are having many examples in that extent where we can demonstrate also that in other type of applications where plastics are being used, they are being recycled, and plastic recyclates are actually being used to lower the carbon footprint as well.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn to Felix for the next question. Now, when we're talking about recycling as one of the pathways to plastic circularity, ensuring that there's demand for recycled content is an important component. What challenges are you facing, Felix, in terms of using recycled content in food contact packaging? And do you think, are you talking about chemical recycling as a solution to this?
This is a great question, and maybe just to complement a little bit on few of the points that Vanya also raised, that they are all connected in a way. As brand owners today, we need to invest on optimizing the packaging that we use from a design perspective. So we talk a lot, like we are switching a lot of, for example, of our flexible packaging to monomaterial to give it a better chance to be recycled. So here we talk about investments and innovation that we are doing. The good point that Vanya made, it's all about the money also in the system. We know today that the collection and sorting, especially for certain type of packaging, will be more expensive than other ones. So we really advocate for this, what we call the net cost, so that we pay the real price of collection and sorting, and we want to take this responsibility, even though this will mean higher EPR fees, the extended producer responsibility fees. And as such, when you are mentioning about the chemical recycling, we know that the chemical recycling is more expensive today than the mechanical recycling. And we are ready to pay this premium to get this material back and use it in our packaging. For example, at Mars, we have committed to use 30% recycled material by 2025. The reality today, coming back to your question, is like even though we wanted to use this, for example, 30% of recycled content today, we cannot find it. It's not there because we know that the whole industry is in the process of development. So we won't be able to use it today. And this is why we need this change to happen when it starts from making more material available from a design perspective to the industry, having the increase of collection and sorting from an efficiency perspective. We know that the systems today, they are not harmonized, and there is a lot of work to be done there to improve collection and sorting. And in parallel, we need the investments in innovative technologies such as the advanced recycling to close the cycle. Unfortunately, if we were only counting on the mechanical recycling, we cannot get food grade material today, at least the type of packaging that we want to use. So if we wanted to close the loop in our case, unfortunately, we cannot make it with mechanical recycling. And this is the reason why we need the chemical recycling, even though the chemical recycling might use higher energy, might be more expensive. But for us, it is a way to close the cycle. So it is a must for us to go circular.
Felix, you make a really good point about not having sufficient supply of recycled content as well, and that kind of segues very nicely into my question to Vanya about the importance of better collection and sorting, because that does have an impact on the economics of recycling. Maybe, Vanya, if you can talk to me a little bit more about that, about some of the challenges municipalities are facing on the collection and sorting front, but maybe particularly with regard to the mandate for separate collection of plastics.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so let's come back to a question that the Commission also asked me, and that was what we need as municipalities to improve separate collection. The Commission is already discussing this as part of the revision of the next Waste Framework Directive. What we need is harmonized labeling. We have an example already in Europe. It's called the Nordic pictogram system. It's on the table. We're discussing it. This is a system which would have the same label on the package, if we're talking about packaging, but it applies to all products, and on the bin, everywhere in Europe, in every city, office, home, street, which takes away the question from the citizen, from the waste holder, where do I put my waste? And that improves both the quality and the quantity which is collected. Now, here we are talking about municipalities in countries with good governance. Step 2 that we really need. We need the Commission to have a strong arm to be able to impose implementation where there are environmental crimes going on and a blind eye is being taken, or that stance is being taken by the national governments. And I have a concrete example. Just last week, we were discussing this with our Cypriot member. They have been trying for many years to implement separate collection of plastics, following on with separate collection of bio-waste. It is not in place, and this is resulting in 200,000 tons per year of mixed, untreated municipal waste being landfilled illegally. And that leachate is going directly into rivers and into the sea. There is nothing our municipalities can do if the national government doesn't allow them to. It's also leading to hazardous industrial waste being mixed with municipal waste. Again, the authorities have been alerted through analyses. Again, nothing is being done. My members cannot make headway in these situations. So we need a fast reaction service, which we will, of course, assist with from the Commission level. It needs external action. Industry and municipalities can work together as hard as we can, but failing local permitting, failing local implementation, we cannot go any further.
Again, I think you've raised some important points. Florica, do you want to respond to some of this, especially on governance, but also then talk a little bit about what needs to be done to prevent the illegal shipments of waste, whether it's outside the region or to landfills?
Yeah, and I would even, if I may, say a few seconds something on also on chemical recycling, because I mean clearly we just heard. I mean it should definitely not land in incineration or on landfill, and therefore normally we always want to go for manual recycling, but sometimes it is not possible. And indeed, we were in close contact now with industry about the potential and the acceptance under very strict conditions, however, of chemical recycling. And I must say, Vanya had mentioned it before, it cannot be then taken that the fuels or the energy that is created by that would then be accounted against recycling targets. Obviously not. But one has to admit that especially current installations of industry would allow for chemical recycling, which also brings them into the circularity approach. So we are looking at it, but with very strict conditions, and obviously where mechanical recycling is not possible, but also where we have a very clear audit trail about what is chemical recycled, how it is treated, how it will be followed up. And on this exactly we are working. So that I just wanted to say, and I also quite agree with Vanya on saying that obviously it is first of all the member state who has to fulfill all the obligations that we are putting out in our legislation, and indeed we also have infringement procedures on up and going, sometimes going to the court, and sometimes despite that waste infrastructure is still not being put in place, which is a pity because we have given, especially now under the resilience and recovery funds, quite a lot of possibilities for member states to close that compliance gap by using this fund. So it is often going beyond just the issue of funding, or it's indeed much sometimes more complex. Let me then turn to illegal shipment, which was also mentioned by Vanya before, because indeed, that is happening within Europe, but also, of course, outside. And it's actually quite an attractive multi-billion euro business. And actually, we had on the 17th of November, we put forward a proposal on a review of the shipment of waste regulation. And as the EVP Timmermans said it quite nicely, trash is cash, but in the context of illegal waste trade, it is really something quite annoying, because it's not only then ending up in environment and creating pollution and degradation, but it is also actually inhibiting often development in third countries, because it fuels corruption and it is also fueling poverty. So it is a very multifaceted problem which we have to look at. And as I said, it's quite attractive. So when we came out with our proposal for the new review of the shipment of waste, the idea was we cannot be the reason for a problem that we ship outside, literally, but we should really be part of the solution. And therefore, we wanted to make sure that with that proposal, only waste can go into third countries, and especially non-OECD countries, if the waste treatment installations are up to standard. But it's also about keeping, and I heard what was said before, keeping a critical mass in the internal market in order to have enough material so as to then create waste recycling and so on. As regards illegal, this illegality, what it is, we are looking or proposing a set of measures to deal with this environmental criminality, because that it is environmental criminality. And some of you might know we have an EU anti-fraud office, which is called OLAF. And the idea is to give them competence to investigate on these waste trafficking in the EU, but also to create a group at the EU level for coordination, cooperation of the enforcement authorities. And of course, member states are now asked to step up the provisions of what is then the penalties, inspections, the sanctions, and so on, and to report on it, and which then again hopefully closes a little bit this compliance gap. And we are actually quite proud that we have put it forward, and we hope that it is taken up, but also sending a signal to third countries of if you want to trade with us, you need to have the right infrastructure in place, for which we then are ready also via development aid to pay. Just to stop it here.
Thank you, Florica. I think, of course, empowering those departments to ensure that they can investigate and ensure compliance, I think, is an important component. I know we could talk about this for a while, but I want to move on a little bit from recycling. I want to quickly touch on reuse as well. Felix, you mentioned this at the start in terms of one of the initiatives that you all are focused on. There are important programs like the Waste Prevention Program, and also very specific Green Deal commitments that call for the reduce of overpackaging. How is that encouraging a shift at Mars towards reuse and reduction of waste?
That's a very good question, and very simply, let me share with you our strategy here, which is based in three pillars. The first one is about reducing the packaging that we do not need. And it's all about this. It's like how we can optimize the weight of the packaging per content. We are also looking very closely on how we can switch some single-use plastic application to reusable packaging. So we have committed, for example, to launch 10 reusable packaging by 2025, and we have already launched few of them at the pilot level as far as today. So it's something that we look very closely. You can also imagine that this is a shift on the mindset also of people. So for some products, we can do it. From some others might be a higher challenge. But I can tell you today that there are few people within Mars that are working on this type of packaging, especially the reusable business model. And the other two pieces of our strategy, I won't come back, but they are linked with the recycling, which is about redesigning the packaging that we do need, and it's also about closing the loop to the packaging that we do need and make it circular. But it is a clear part of our strategy today to bring more and more usable packaging in the market.
Okay, great. Thank you, Felix. I want to move on to our second segment on collaborating for solutions. And Florica, I'll come to you first here. Of course, the Circular Plastics Alliance is a strong example of this, of bringing together stakeholders. Could you tell us a bit more about how it works, who's involved, and how it's fostering some innovative business models, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. So we have this Circular Plastics Alliance. Within the Commission, we have the Secretariat. But as always, when we work with industry, we always have an alliance of all stakeholders. But here, in this case, it's in particular the plastic industry that is involved with us. And they have themselves actually set out to achieve a very ambitious target by going for sort of a roadmap to have 10 million tons of recycled plastic in new products by 2025. That's actually quite ambitious, and we are very much supporting that, also with capacity building and with giving them funding ideas and so on. But what does it really mean? If you want to achieve this high level, it means that you have to look, and Vanya, I think, mentioned it, or Felix, I'm not sure, or Benny. Somebody said we need sorting capacities and we need recycling capacities. This is not the same, right? I mean, Vanya was talking about the labeling, which is clear because then you can bring it, but you also need to have the infrastructure in place. And this is actually quite a high level of investment, because if you want to reach this roadmap of 10 million tons of recycled plastic in new products by 25, you need now to invest. And if you look at sorting capacities, they would have to increase, and that is actually by 33%. This is quite a lot of 2.5 billion investment. But the more important part is to have the recycling capacities increase, and that is basically leading to a 6.6 billion investment. Now, again, my interaction with industry always leads to one clear conclusion. Industry is ready to embark. They take it up. There's a lot of innovation going on, but they need predictability, regulatory predictability. And that's where we try to put forward clear proposals, which then, of course, the member state and the parliament have to also endorse. But we need this transformation if we want to go for green and sustainable products and also lower our carbon footprint. So I think recycling, sorting and recycling, of course, labeling others, all of this has to go together. And in our regulatory proposals, we set actually these targets so that industry can, change the production process accordingly. And there are, of course, other examples. I think there's also a European Plastic Pact with member states or others. But you asked me now precisely on this alliance, and I think it's a very, very strong alliance and a very positive alliance.
Thank you, Florica. Vanya, I want to ask you about how waste management companies should work with plastic producers, again, to better understand the pathways to sorting and collection and so on, and to understand what materials are recyclable and how to manage all of that. How are municipalities working with plastic producers?
So municipalities don't work directly with plastics producers because we work with their intermediaries through, for example, packaging and their extended producer responsibility organizations. We work together with them in order to streamline and improve separate collection systems. This, for example, would consist of perhaps discussions on types of separate collection, but also communication tools towards the public, and communication tools towards also commerce and small businesses where that they are included in municipal waste. I absolutely agree with what Florica says. We need investment in sorting. Sorting capacity is a local investment because where we collect, the closer we sort to where we collect, the more control we can keep on achieving high quality, high quantity, and lowering these losses that we are experiencing today. Because this is also, of course, a loss of the funds which have been invested in achieving high quality of separate collection. We also need high investment, more investment in both mechanical and chemical recycling. There are different types of chemical recycling. We haven't discussed that today. But there is a difference between investment in sorting, which should be local, and investment in recycling, which can be focused in certain areas of Europe. For example, it is an expensive technology. It needs feedstock. It needs economies of scale. So you could have centers of excellence in different parts of Europe. There, we need this digital the online notification system for pre-notified recycling plants within Europe, because that ties the collected plastic waste through sorting directly to that recycling plant. And that is a control mechanism which can improve quantity of recycled plastics available to go into new products and therefore reach minimum recycled content targets.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vanya, for that. Again, you made a really important point about that distinction between investing in sorting capacity locally and then maybe in recycling infrastructure, maybe broadly, regionally, or in some clusters. I think, again, collaboration, you need some collaboration on that front. So it's an important point to keep in mind. I do want to shift to collaboration in terms of information sharing as well. And Benny, I'll come to you. Earlier when we were speaking, you said something about industry being open and transparent about challenges that they're facing. I can imagine that companies will be reluctant to do so if initiatives are not successful. How do you see a system like this working where there's a safe space for industry to share information on challenges that they're facing? Should there be some sort of formal framework around this?
Oh, thanks for that question. And I think the first important thing to state is we fully acknowledge that we are facing a huge challenge in transitioning to a circular economy. And we are really accelerating a lot of the efforts. And to talk to what Florica was saying in that regard as well, I think the dialogue with the Commission is really good to that extent. And we need chemical recycling to be part of the solution. We realize also that today we don't have all the answers, but we really want to be open and transparent about the challenges we face. And to that extent, I really want to state that we have commissioned recently an independent study on the future pathways for our industry in a circular net zero emissions European plastics economy by 2050, as it is set forward by the European Green Deal and the Paris Agreement. This report will be launched in the first quarter of next year, and I fundamentally believe that that report will be a challenge to all of us, but very much hope that we can respond by working more closely together, be transparent about the challenges that we face, and accelerate finally the transition to a low carbon circular economy. And that's what we are really about. We are, as an industry, very keen to listen. We want to talk, we want to engage with our stakeholders because we are confronted with a lot of challenging topics, and collaboration is, according to us, the best solution for society.
Does that report highlight some of the challenges that the industry is facing? Is that part of the discussion in that report?
Absolutely. So it will not only talk about the challenges, but it will also talk about potential scenarios to move to a circular net zero emission European plastics economy.
Okay, great. Felix, I want to come to you again on the theme of information sharing. Now, a really important component or an approach to making these packaging choices is life cycle assessment. And this will need information from across the value chain to properly assess the environmental footprint of some of these alternative materials. How much do you rely on LCA, and how are you going about collecting that information? Again, thinking about how we need to work with different stakeholders.
Thank you. Can I just make a comment on what was said before, and I will come back
Sure.
to these questions, and it's linked also with information. What we need to keep in mind, especially when we talk about the recycling of plastics, is that unfortunately today is a non-profitable business, meaning that the cost of collection and sorting is higher than the revenue than the plastic can bring if it's sold as a recycled material. And this is why in Europe we have those EPR schemes that we are subsidizing in a way, the collection and sorting, to make the material attractive to the recycling industry so that they can make the investments, etc. But let's keep in mind that we are in a kind of paradox situation where the more we want to recycle, the more will cost. So this transparency of the information, because we have a lot of different players in the value chain, is also going to help to bring more efficiency, but also reduce the cost. Because the lower the cost, the higher we can hope the recycling rate. So just a small parenthesis to what was mentioned before. Coming to the LCA, it's extremely important to have an idea on the environmental impacts of the packaging. We are definitely considering. That said, if we keep the circular economy in mind, meaning that if we design our packaging to be recycled, if we use recycled material in our packaging, and if our packaging is recycled at a very high rates, automatically, in a way, we are going to reduce the CO2 emissions. So going circular, it's also being lower from a carbon emission perspective. So it's going in the right direction. It's not going against it.
Felix, but do you feel you have the information necessary to make those assessments? Do you have, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel the information needs to come from various parties along the value chain, but do you feel like you have enough to make those assessments, or do you need to work with other parties more to get that?
I think today, at least in the field of packaging, we have the necessary information. The tricky part about life cycle assessment and people that they have been involved in it is that it's not an exact science. So it really depends on the assumptions that you are taking, the modeling. So I don't think that it's a lack of information. It's mainly how you interpret the results. So this is the tricky part of the LCA. But I think if you just use the existing data, you can have a good image on what can be done or not in a way, and how you can improve your packaging in our case.
Great, that's a great point. Thank you so much for that, Felix. I want to turn to Florica to maybe just go a little beyond packaging, right? So we focused a lot of our discussion on packaging, and for good reason. But of course, this is relevant in terms of plastic use and collection and recycling in other sectors too. For instance, in the automotive sector, where there's plastic use in cars, for instance. How is the European Commission thinking about applications, recycling targets, initiatives in those sectors? Is there something that's planned or already in place?
Yeah, I come to that in a minute, but I also wanted to react to Felix, if you allow,
Yeah,
because
please
indeed,
do.
I think that he's absolutely right. For the moment, it is more expensive, especially virgin material are still more attractive. That has to do with a lot of things. But I think this is why we know consumption is not going down, and we are not about cutting consumption, but the waste stream, the packaging is going up. So what we need to do is probably look at a hierarchy of efforts. I mean, a hierarchy of waste. I mean, let's try to reduce, perhaps decouple consumption from the waste generation, reduce and then reuse. And if you can't, then recycle. But I'm sorry, indeed, you were absolutely right. It's not all about packaging, but it's just something where the consumer is always confronted in supermarket. And I think the consumers are reacting to it. And they don't want it necessarily. Neither do they want over packaging. But I now come to what you asked me, because you asked me about other areas of where we have this high potential of circularity, but also reduction of plastic production and therefore polluting in the environment. And indeed, as you said, one area is certainly the automotive sector. And because we do know that for the time being, they use a lot of plastic, actually virgin plastic. And why is it so? Because also by going towards electrified vehicles and electrified traffic, the batteries are becoming heavy, and therefore you have to reduce the weight of a car elsewhere, and that is where you go for plastic. And that's why we will in 22, perhaps 23, come out with also new requirements for the recycled content. It doesn't mean that you cannot use plastic, but that you have to have a certain amount of recycled plastic in cars in the future, and that we will do through the revision of the end of life vehicle directive. And as I said, it's probably end of next year, beginning 23. And it goes hand in hand with what we try to achieve. If we want to go more for electric cars, we have to also see what might be the consequence. And again, what Felix or Benny have said, we need to ensure that through legislation also and requirements and targets and, for instance, recycled content targets, you create a internal market where it is attractive enough and you have the critical mass, and therefore the price goes down, because it's all about price signals as well. I mean, most of our legislation always looks primarily at the pollution effect on the degradation of the environment, and also of how to reduce our carbon and environmental footprint. But at the same time, we also want to spur a new green economy, and towards this, if you want, green industrial revolution. And for that, we need to also make sure price signals are right, taxation is right, the whole infrastructure is right. So we have to work on a very holistic approach, including on innovation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think for that emphasis on price, and that complements what Felix said as well. Right now, maybe the economics don't completely work, and so therefore, perhaps by scaling up, perhaps with a few subsidies to spur this sector, I think that might help us achieve the desired result there. We're coming very close to the end of this discussion, and I want to give all our panelists just a quick minute to maybe tell me what your key takeaway from this discussion was, what maybe stood out to you the most, and what do you think all these stakeholders should prioritize in that move towards circularity. So I'll start with Benny first. Just as a quick closing remark, if you have in a minute, if you can tell me what your key takeaway was from this.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to sum this up really based on my experience for having worked over 30 years in this industry. I think we have to accept that uncertainty is inherent to the process of developing new technologies and innovations, and they need time to deliver and to be developed for the right impact. So on the other side, I think we have to move quickly, and we have talked about it multiple times. We have to develop a supportive regulatory framework. because if we don't do so, it will stifle investment and innovation. We as an industry, we have within our DNA science and innovation that has cut across for over 100 years. And I believe we are well equipped to respond to that. So, from my perspective, I think the whole topic that we discussed on collaboration to really develop the full potential of the circular model is going to be really important and incentivize investments. And we as an industry are willing really to engage with all the stakeholders in that regard as well. And therefore, I think collective history has told us in the past that when we have shared objectives, when we challenge each other and draw on the best that each other has to offer, there is no challenge that we can't overcome. So collaboration for me is the really critical component, and I'm really pleased to see that from all the stakeholders in that extent as well.
Thank you, Benny. Vanya, can I come to you next?
Yes, I think I'll just underline the fact that without collaboration, we cannot achieve a circular economy for plastics or for anything else. It is a loop and not a line anymore, so we depend on each other. I would also like to recognize the plastics industry's handling of this challenge. They have taken it very seriously. They're investing in research and development, investing in new plants, and also investing in time to collaborate with us as one of the parties. So I think I will leave that there.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Felix?
So maybe as a conclusion for me, let's keep in mind, plastic, it's made out of oil, and Europe is not a huge producer of oil. So I think it's in the strategic interest of Europe to invest in the reuse or the recycling of plastic for the simple reason of keeping the resources locally. So this circularity, I think it's really the future. It makes so much sense go in this direction, and we really need to go fast. I will agree with Benny on this. We need to go fast on this.
Absolutely. The sense of urgency is real. Florica, for the final word.
Thank you. But I rather echo what Vanya said, but also what industry has just said. I think there's an interest for Europe also from the strategic autonomy point of view. But I think for me, when I review our conversation, I think it really shows that it's not just about one legislation or one target or one technology. If we want to look at a plastic strategy, it's really a holistic approach. And we need a comprehensive view. I think I share the sense of urgency, but also that it is doable, because every stakeholder, and that is all us here around this virtual table, if we want to move towards a circular plastics economy, we can do. And I think all are involved, and I see it possible. And each of us as regulator, we will have to bring some enabling in. That is what we can do, but innovation, funding, implementation comes from the municipal to the industry level, and together I very much subscribe to this collaborative approach.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's been a truly wonderful discussion. I think for me, what's maybe the trickiest element, but also the most interesting, is this balancing act between fostering demand for recycled content, increasing supply at the same time, and then bringing all of this together and bringing all of the value chain, members of the value chain together. I think it's going to be a challenging effort. But again, it's encouraging to see that there's signs of collaboration, there's signs of urgency and the recognition of how important this is across players. So I really appreciate all of your insights. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us today. Thank you to our audience for staying tuned. And of course, thank you once again to Plastics Europe for their support of this session. Do join us for the final day of the World Ocean Summit Asia Pacific. All sessions will be available to view on demand for the next 4 weeks.